disaster that will have such an impact on so many people, potentially going to lose their homes, and hopefully not, but perhaps some people may lose their lives as well. How does a campaign need to change and adapt to take account of that?
Well, in normal times, I would say that this is a moment that politics shouldn't be the focus. It should be about safety and making sure that people have the resources they need and get evacuated. And by all accounts, I think, from Democrat, Republican governors in the region have been doing their very best to inform their constituents, to inform the people of the residents who live there. I do agree that I think the former president has played a role that has been counterproductive to those efforts. But largely, we're seeing people working together across the aisle, regardless of political leanings, to make sure that those who are in the line of Milton, or whether it was Helene, are getting what they needed to hopefully not perish, and to make sure that their homes, that they're okay and have the resources they need. But when you play politics with something so dangerous or so important and so massive, it can be really dangerous.
Why do you think it is that former President Trump has been making these statements about funding for FEMA, about how much money that those affected by the hurricanes are receiving, statements that FEMA itself has had to put a fact-checking page on its own website about? Why do you think Donald Trump is making those claims repeatedly?
The unfortunate answer is ego. When it comes down to, we're just a few weeks away from the election. And it's largely viewed in American politics that anything that leads up between now and Election Day, that anything that happens in this country could be, or in world politics really, could be blamed on the Harris-Biden administration and affect the Harris-Walz ticket. I think with Donald Trump, he knows that that's been a kind of an easy go-to. And I think if you're looking for someone to blame when things go wrong, Donald Trump's ready to point you in the direction of who to choose and who to blame, because it's easier to allocate your fear into anger and have someone else to point the finger at and blame. It's not I wouldn't say it's a great strategy, and it's not good for us as a society and for our moral compass. But largely when it comes to Donald Trump, it's ego. He's not looking out for anyone else but himself. And that's the unfortunate reality that Republicans are going to continue to be faced with. He has only looked out for himself since he ran in 2016. And Republicans down ballot have unfortunately incurred the cost of that.
Well, speaking of this issue being politicised, the President was making an address to the nation about it just a little earlier within the last hour, and he actually addressed those comments that Donald Trump made. So let's have a listen to what Joe Biden had to say.
Over the last few weeks, there's been a reckless and irresponsible and relentless promotion of disinformation and outright lies about what's going on. It's undermining confidence in the people of Florida, and incredible rescue and recovery work that has been undertaken. Literally, there are thousands of fellow Americans who are putting their lives at stake and putting on the line to do the dangerous work that needs to be done now. And it's harmful to those who most need the help. Quite frankly, these lies are un-American, and there is simply no place for them. Not now, not ever. Former President Trump has led this onslaught of lies. Assertions have been made that property is being confiscated. It's simply not true. They're saying people impacted by these storms will receive $750 in cash and no more. That is simply not true either.
Eric, when the President is speaking about the former President like this, and they've both brought the hurricane and politics into it, let's be frank about it, how does that impact voters, though?
Again, I think it's a reminder of who Donald Trump is. And I think Democrats over the past 8 years have been reluctant to meet Donald Trump on his level and call him out for what he's saying. This is the height of irresponsibility and cynicism in the middle of two disasters to spread misinformation, disinformation that could cost lives. And thank goodness that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, but particularly President Biden right there, called Donald Trump out on this.
We speak so much about this election being one about turnout, given how close it is, and both campaigns are frantically trying to turn people out. You've worked for many years to get people out to vote in Pennsylvania. Do issues like this encourage voters or turn them off?
I think they can turn people off, but at the same time, if government is working and working well, it reminds people of the role of government. And people in America historically have had a great relationship over hundreds of years, 250 years with our government, because we are a government of the people, by the people. We are the government. And I think there's this there's been a 30-year-long campaign by the Republican Party to demonize government. But a hurricane can be a reminder of the role of government and the positive things that can be done here through that work.
Of course, the other issue that's occupying the White House occupants and the former president as well is the situation in the Middle East. We saw Joe Biden speak to Prime Minister Netanyahu, and Maura, we've heard that Donald Trump has spoken to Prime Minister Netanyahu in recent days as well. How do you think the Trump campaign and the Republicans need to handle that issue on the run into the election?
I don't think that they're going to talk about it too much down ballot. I think Donald Trump will just continue to say that he has these great relationships and that things would never have happened if he were still in power or if he were still in the White House. But I think what the core of it comes down to, and I think on messaging and how Republicans should be messaging this issue, but also talking about the hurricanes and the natural disasters and just things that are going on in the world right now. It all boils down to humanity. So to Eric's point, yes, the Republicans largely don't want, big government oversight and too much of a heavy hand by the federal government. But there is this moment here, and both with the hurricanes, but also with what's happening in the Middle East, that humanity must prevail, and that should be our first concern. And with hurricanes, we've seen communities step up and help one another. You have people who are not part of any necessarily volunteer group, but they are putting themselves in the line of fire. They're putting themselves out there, taking time off work to help the communities that have been most hit, most ravaged by these storms. And you see this effort by people. And again, I think that's what it calls to, is this humanity. We are only out here for each other. We need to be out here for each other and help one another out. And that goes with our neighbors, but also with our allies. And I think that's the message that Republicans should go into past November.
And as we've said, Maura, this is a very close race. Do you think these issues do encourage people to come out to vote, or is it something else?
At the end of the day, it's going to come down to the motivating factor is either going to be the economy or safety and security. And that's what's going to drive people to the polls or to the ballot box. I think that for Republicans, what I've been encouraging people is, if you are still not sure that you want to vote Donald Trump, you're going to look for any reason. If you're going to look for any reason to vote for him, you're going to make excuses, and that's your choice. But you don't have to vote for Donald Trump to stay a Republican. There are plenty of good Republicans to vote for down ballot, and you don't have to choose that for the top of the ticket. And I think it's an important reminder when the stakes are so high and our democracy is here at the forefront. Your vote matters, but you can use it how you choose. It's not a one size fit all. You don't have to go all R down the ballot or all D down the ballot. You can really be thoughtful this election.
Eric, how do you think the Harris campaign should be approaching these last few weeks?
Well, Maura brings up a good point of the demographic of the never Trumpers, that strata of the Republican Party, which has never been supportive of Donald Trump, and they worry about what he could do over the next 4 years. And therefore, they may not vote, or they may not show up, or they may just leave that blank. And I think that demographic, combined with the women demographic, are going to be critical. The Dobbs decision, it turns out when you take a vote away from 52% of the population, when you take a right away from women who've had that right for 50 years, they take umbrage, and they're going to turn out in force. I think what the campaign needs to do is double down on all of the demographics that it needs to turn out, from women to young voters, and to not give up on union households.
Given what you're saying and what Maura's been saying there, do you think there could be a sizable number of people who aren't being captured by the polls, and perhaps this isn't as close as it looks?
I think that's right. And I think what's also happening with the polls, there are a lot of what we would call junk polls going into the aggregate, not high quality polling. And when you dig down into the tabs, you realize their statistical sampling methodology is not all that great or not all that large. So I think what people are seeing are some polls that are skewed toward Trump in an attempt to make this look closer, so that if Kamala Harris were to win the 7 states and run away with this, they'd say, well, this is opposite of what happened in the polling, and therefore it must be a fraud. But I think, back to the hurricane, if you want a preview of what Election Day is going to look like in the days after Election Day, look at the way that the Trump administration is handling this natural disaster, because Trump is a political hurricane, and we're going to see a replay of this exact same playbook again leading up to the election.
Maura, what are your thoughts on that? Do you think it is not as close maybe as the polls are making out?
I struggle when it comes to polls, because at the end of the day, it really just matters about who you get to turn up for you. So turnout is just the most important thing. And I don't know that polls are always accurate in getting a clear picture of what people are really feeling and or going to decide. There are a lot of people in this country who simply don't want to choose between these two choices, just as they didn't want to choose between Donald Trump when it was against Joe Biden. So I think you still have this uncertainty in a large swath of the American people. But to Eric's point, for the Harris campaign, there is an opportunity to capitalize on the undecideds and those Republicans who are not keen on Donald Trump. And on the flip side, I would say that Donald Trump has not tried to reach those voters. He has actually kind of bucked that opportunity time and time again. He's also bucked that opportunity to win over the women vote. And I think that that's been a real detriment, not only to his campaign, but again, to the down ballot races that really do depend on a top ticket candidate coming out for them. Another thing I'll say too is, yes, the polls may be showing it's very close. And maybe, again, we won't know until Election Day, unfortunately. But what's interesting too here is the campaign, the fundraising. Donald Trump has, again, just been fundraising for himself, and Republicans down ballot have been struggling to even, I won't even say keep up with their Democratic counterparts. They've really struggled to turn out an impressive fundraising number as they have in the past. So that's been disappointing too. And I know it's been a frustration for Republicans who see great opportunity to build the bigger majority that they have in the House and to flip the Senate. But when you have a top tier, the top of the ticket is chaos, and he is, spreading misinformation and constantly looking out for himself and only himself, that's problematic for the long term and also the short term.